This broadcast is brought to you by the British Israel Church of God. The Watchman program. Evangelist and commentator Peter Salemi, bringing you the truth about today's world news in the light of Bible prophecy.
If you have studied the history of the Church of God, then you would know that the Church of God has been prophesying to the peoples called the United States, the British Commonwealth of Nations, and the peoples of northwestern Europe. They have been prophesying to them shortly after World War II about a coming enemy that's going to arise out of Central Europe, and this enemy is going to subjugate many of these nations of Britain and Scandinavia and put them into slavery and captivity. Now, the Church of God came to the knowledge of the identity of these Western powers in Bible prophecy. And when they came to that knowledge, then 1/3 of Bible prophecy became unlocked to them, and they could understand Bible prophecy. The one vital key to understanding 1/3 of your Bible, because 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy, and 60 to 70% of the prophecies have yet to occur and have not been fulfilled, and they are going to be fulfilled in this end time. That vital key that unlocks all Bible prophecy is the identity of the Western powers of the United States and the British and the peoples of northwestern Europe. Now, our booklet, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, goes through this in great detail and shows you exactly who we are in Bible prophecy. And the United States and Britain are mentioned more times than any other nation in the Bible. When we look at the biblical prophecies of the Old Testament, we see a people called the House of Israel, and that means primarily the United States and the British and the peoples of northwestern Europe. We are the Israelites of the Bible. Now, when you look at Old Testament history, you see that the kingdom of Israel was split in two. You had the northern 10 tribe, House of Israel, and then you had the southern tribes of the House of Judah. Now, the House of Judah are the Jews, consisting of the one tribe Judah, remnants of Benjamin, and portions of Levi. And Levi was prophesied to be scattered all over Israel. Those are the modern day Jews today. But what about Dan, Asher, Reuben, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, of the kingdom of Israel, the house of Israel? These peoples were never Jews, never have been Jews, and never will be Jews. These people are called the so-called lost 10 tribes of Israel, and they got taken away by the Assyrians. And the Assyrian nation came in with many successive waves of invasions that you read in 2 Kings 15 and 17, and took the house of Israel away and set them between the Black and the Caspian Sea. And there they settled among the Assyrians. And eventually, these peoples migrated from that area and migrated up into Europe and in northern Europe. And these peoples were not called the Israelites. They weren't called Hebrews. They were called by their enemies the Bit Cumri, or the Kimbric peoples. And these Kimbric peoples were also known as the Scythians. And when you look at old monuments in Iran where they settled, like the Beth Histon Rock, you will see that the Cimmerians, or the Kimbric peoples, and the Scythians, it says, were one and the same peoples. And these peoples were known by the Greeks as the Celts. So these Celtic tribes and these Scythian tribes settled up into northern Europe, Scandinavia, and Britain. And there they settled and then eventually colonized Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and became a great nation the United States being that great nation, and a great company of nations being the British Commonwealth of Nations. And then we see the Scandinavian peoples as well. And these are called the House of Israel. And when one understands the identity of the House of Israel, one can turn around and do the work of the Watchman, which was prophesied to happen to these peoples. That the church of God, Jesus Christ told them to watch, to do the work of the Watchman. And so the Watchman work, which is among the House of Israel, the Watchman work, the church of God, has been prophesying to these peoples since after World War II about a coming enemy that's going to arise out of Central Europe. And they came to understand who that enemy is and the identity of that enemy. And when one can understand who this enemy is and its modern day nation, one can understand the prophecies of the coming beast power, because this enemy will lead the beast, a 10-nation combine, possibly called a United States of Europe. And this beast power, led by this certain nation, is going to subjugate many of the European Israelite nations and put them into slavery and captivity, and that includes also the house of Judah. This beast power is going to come and attack Judah and set himself up in Jerusalem, and there's also prophesied a coming temple of God that's going to be placed in Jerusalem. And in that temple, this beast power is going to set up what the Bible calls the false prophet, which we have identified as the Pope in Rome. He's going to set up the Pope in the temple of God, as it says in 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, that he sets himself up as God, showing himself that he is God, and the Pope, of course, claims to be the vicar of Christ, meaning that he represents God on earth. So the beast power is going to do that. Now, this beast power is going to be led by a nation and a person that the biblical prophecies called the Assyrian. So who are the modern day Assyrians today? Now, as I mentioned, the Israelites migrated up into northern Europe and settled into Scandinavia and Britain. Along with them, when the Babylonian Empire became the world empire at that time, they invaded Assyria with their capital in Nineveh. They invaded Assyria, and the Assyrians scattered as well up through the Black and the Caspian Sea and migrated with the Israelites. And you see in history the Assyriani, the Halmani, the Chatti migrating with the people called the Kimbric and the Scythians. And these Assyriani and Chatti and Hessians settled in the place called Germany and Austria today. And so the modern day Germans and the Austrians are called, in Bible prophecy, the Assyrians. And we find that the Assyrian is going to lead what the Bible calls a beast power. And this beast power is going to be formed by a 10-nation combine that we find in Revelation, the 17th chapter. A 10-nation combine, that these 10 nations will give their power and strength to the beast. And that beast is called in the Old Testament the Assyrian. And we also find that this beast power is going to mix itself with what the Bible calls the miry clay nations. And we have identified these miry clay nations as the Northern African and Black African nations. So it's going to be a huge empire stretching from Europe all the way down to Africa and part of the Arab world. And it's going to come into Jerusalem, take over Jerusalem, set the Pope in Rome in Jerusalem. And that is going to trigger what the Bible calls the Great Tribulation. And the Great Tribulation is coming upon the peoples of Jacob. It is called Jacob's trouble in Jeremiah, the 30th chapter, verse 7. And who is modern-day Jacob today? The United States and the British Commonwealth of Nations, and that includes my nation up here in Canada as well. We are the house of Israel. It is prophesied that Israel, Ephraim, and Manasseh, it is prophesied that they would become a great people, Manasseh would become a great people, and that Ephraim would become a great company, a commonwealth, a multitude of many nations. And that describes perfectly the British Empire, which eventually became the British Commonwealth of Nations, and that includes Canada, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and many of the colonies around the world. And it is prophesied for them to fall. And as I mentioned earlier, the Church of God has been prophesying that these nations are going to fall. The European nations, Israelite nations, are going to fall by a power called the beast, and it's going to be led by Germany. And they've been doing it since shortly after World War II. After the fall of the Nazi regime, the Church of God boldly came out and said, you are going to see a rise of this German power, and this German power is going to put the nations of Israel in slavery and captivity. Now, when we see just recently the elections in Austria, we see the elections in Germany, many parties are now in the Bundestag. We see now in Austria nationalistic parties that have taken over Austria, part of the Bundestag in Germany, and we are starting to see anti-immigrant parties that are starting to gain power all over Europe. We're also starting to see this Austrian party that just won in Austria, along with the Freedom Party that came in second. They are anti-immigrant, but they're also anti-EU. And we have been saying that the EU is going to collapse. And that after the collapse of the EU is going to come the final rise of what the Bible calls the beast of prophecy, the seventh and final head of that beast. And it's going to be, again, a 10-nation combine, and the beast is going to lead it, and that beast is going to arise out of Germany. And we are starting to see Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and now this new party in Austria, led by a man who's only 31 years old. This new party in Austria, they are all anti-EU, and many of the peoples in Western Europe are anti-EU as well. The only ones who really want the EU to stay intact is Germany and France. I mean, they're still negotiating the Brexit. Britain wants out of the EU. The Eastern European nations want out of the EU. And now Austria just elected a leader that is anti-EU. And we have been saying it for years now that the EU is going to fall because it is the downward slide of the sixth head of the beast. And that seventh head is going to be a brand new European power led by Germany. Now, before I go on with some of these prophecies, I want to offer you this free booklet, Germany in Prophecy, that goes through the prophecies about the Assyrian, and we show you how this Assyrian is the beast of the New Testament. And also we want to offer you this booklet, What is the Beast of Revelation? Free of charge, off our website, britishisrael.ca. You can download it from there. Bill Petzinas will give you more information about how you can inquire more about our organization.
To download your free literature, log onto our website at www.britishisrael.ca. If you want to write, call, or text for more information, our address is the British Israel Church of God, P.O. Box 30043, Brooklyn Town Center, Whitby, Ontario, Canada. Postal code is L1MOB5. Our USA address is 171 West Barbara Avenue, Pahrump, Nevada, USA. Postal code 89060. If you want to reach us by telephone, call or text at 905-447-4415 or 416-898-7407.
You know, at the end of World War II, many leaders said at that time that Germany would never rise again. When they looked at all the cities of Germany lying in absolute rubble, they said, how could Germany possibly rise ever again as a military power? And so many thought that, but at that time, when Germany was lying in absolute rubble, the Church of God at that time was using radio at the time, then eventually television, came on radio, came on television, and prophesied and said that Germany is going to rise again, that you are going to see a militaristic Germany once again rise and put many of the peoples of Britain and Scandinavia and the peoples called the Jews in slavery and captivity. How bold to come out and say that when everybody else was saying that Germany would never rise again. Yet, here we see, in this modern age in which we live, who is the economic powerhouse in Europe? Who is the leader of Europe? Now, they're not militaristic as they were under Hitler, but they are an economic powerhouse, and now we're starting to see nationalistic parties taking over Austria. They're third in the Bundestag, and they are gaining in power. They are anti-immigrant, and this all started with Angela Merkel letting in 1 million plus refugees into Germany, into Europe, and these refugees they're raping women, they're stealing. The governments of many of these nations, like Italy, have pushed out people out of their own homes, telling their own peoples to live on the streets or in their cars and giving their homes to refugees so they can stay. And refugees are making all these demands. They want visas, they want cell phones, and it's costing taxpayers, the burden of the taxpayers, just unreal in Europe today, and people are just sick and tired of it, and now they're turning to nationalistic and xenophobic parties. And now these nationalistic and xenophobic parties are gaining power in Europe, and they're all anti-EU as well, and we have been saying for years now that the EU is going to fall. At the time, when we started this program back in 2002, 2003, at the time when every evangelist, every preacher was saying that the EU is the coming beast of prophecy. Jack Van Impe, Grant Jeffrey, Hal Lindsey, all of them were saying the EU is the coming beast of prophecy. We were the only ones on the internet, our presence is on the internet, but on the internet we were the only ones saying that the EU is the sixth head of the beast. Now, when you look at Revelation, the 17th chapter, it is portrayed as mountains. And mountains rise, peak, and fall. It peaked during the time of Hitler and Mussolini. And now the EU is the downward slide of that sixth head. And when that EU collapses, you are going to see a seventh and final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire, and it's going to be led by Germany. And so, we were the only ones saying the EU is going to collapse, the EU is going to fall at the time when nobody thought the EU was going to fall, and now look. We see Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and now we see Austria with the leading party and also the party that came in second, the Freedom Party, both anti-EU, anti-immigrant, nationalistic parties in power now, and we are starting to see more and more cracks in the EU till eventually it will collapse. I think the only ones who want to be in the EU is Angela Merkel and Macron there in France. Everybody else wants out. We see the Brexit negotiations. Britain wants out. Catalonia had their independence vote. They want out. Italy, we see the Five-Star Party. That's, they're saying that the Five-Star Party in the next elections will take over the reins of government. They want out of the EU. And of course, we see Eastern Europe. Greece, they had their chance to leave the EU, and then Cyprus there folded to German demands, and Greece is still in the EU, but how long is that going to last? The EU is going to break up. And when that happens, then a rise of a Central European power led by Germany is going to lead a 10-nation combine called the Beast of Prophecy that you read of in Revelation, the 17th chapter. And that power is going to mix itself with the miry clay nations that you read in Daniel, the 2nd chapter, and verse 43. Those miry clay nations are the black African nations, the northern African nations. And that empire is going to subjugate European Israel, put them into slavery and captivity, and they are also going to put the Jews in slavery and captivity as well and take over Jerusalem and the Promised Land. It is prophesied to happen. I'm going to show you some of these prophecies now. In Isaiah, the 10th chapter, here we see in verse 5, it says, O Assyrian, and those are the modern-day Germans and Austrians today. Now this leader that's prophesied to happen, is he going to come out of Austria? Is he going to come out of Germany? We're just going to have to wait and see. But he is going to be of German stock, German ancestry. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. Verse 6, I will set him against an hypocritical nation. And that nation that God is speaking of is Israel, the Israelite peoples, and against the people of my wrath. Why is God so angry with Israel? Well, when you read of other prophecies about what's going on in Israel, they have forsaken Almighty God. They are sinning against him. They have rejected God. And so God says they've come under his wrath, his curse. So God is going to allow this beast power to come in and subjugate Britain and Scandinavia and put them into slavery and captivity. I will send them against an hypocritical nation, against the people of my wrath, to give him charge, to take the spoil, to take the prey, and to tread them down like mire in the streets. So that's prophesied to happen to Britain and Scandinavia. There's going to be another world war, and this time Britain, Scandinavia, and the United States is going to lose that war. Now, the United States has to deal with a different enemy, and that enemy is called Gog, and we've identified Gog as China. And China is going to lead a huge combine that's going to come and invade Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada. They have to deal with China. The European nations, they're going to have to deal with this Central European power coming out of Germany. Notice in verse 7 it says, but it is in his heart to destroy and to cut off nations, not a few. So he's a man of war. This German leader is going to be militaristic. A little later on in verse 12 it says, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria. So he's prideful. He's a vile person. He's militaristic in nature. And it says in the glory of his high looks. So he's a very proud person. Now notice what it says a little later on in this prophecy. It says in verse 20, it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such that are escaped of the house of Jacob shall no more again stay upon him that smote him, that's the Assyrian, but shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. Other prophecies show that when Israel is in slavery and captivity, they will finally repent and submit themselves to God, and God is going to save them. Then it says in verse 24, thus says the Eternal, O my people that dwell in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with a rod, and shall lift up his staff against you after the manner of Egypt. And of course, the Israelites of old were in slavery and captivity, and the Assyrian, who is going to lead the beast, is going to put Israel in the same type of situation. Now, a little later on in Isaiah, the 11th chapter, in the first few verses, it plainly shows that this is speaking of the kingdom of God and the mountain of God and so on. We see the nature of animals are going to change. Verse 1, it describes Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and this describes his character, the wonderful qualities of Jesus Christ. He is a descendant of David and so on. And then it says in verse 9, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. That's the kingdom of God. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the eternal as the waters cover the sea. Then it talks about the bringing back of Israel. And it says in verse 11, it says, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Eternal shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people that shall be left from Assyria. And that's modern day Germany and Austria today. And from Egypt. And that's one of the nations, one of the miry clay nations that Assyria has an alliance with. And from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And that's, of course, Gog and Magog. So this European power is only going to put European Israel and Judah in slavery and captivity. Now, I want to read you another prophecy here in Isaiah, the 14th chapter. And it says this about the Assyrian. And it says in verse 24 of Isaiah 14, the Lord of hosts hath sworn, saying, surely, as I have thought, so it shall come to pass, and as I have proposed, so it shall stand, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him under foot. Then shall his yoke shall depart from off them, and his burden from off their shoulders. And this is the purpose that I propose to do upon the whole earth, and upon this, and this is the hand that is stretched upon all nations. So God is going to break the Assyrian in his land. And when we read of the prophecies in the New Testament, it is speaking of the beast power. So God is going to break the beast power in the Holy Land, and that beast, it says, is going to be slain, and the beast and the false prophet, they are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. And you can read that in Revelation, the 19th chapter. So I want you to get this free booklet, Germany in Prophecy and what is the beast of prophecy, and it'll explain many of these prophecies to you about the coming Assyrian and how the Assyrian is going to put Israel, European Israel, Britain and Scandinavia in slavery and captivity unless we repent. This is Peter Salemi saying goodbye, friends, and I'll see you here next time on the Watchman program.